One of the hardest parts about being good at chess is learning what to do in the middle game. So I picked up this book, Improve Your Chess Pattern Recognition, which helps you identify key patterns and motifs in the middle game to help you become a better chess player. So in this game, we're gonna be going over the Deceptive bishop from c8 and how it's actually, for being a bad bishop, can be very helpful in your structure as a whole. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So we have our first game here, and it's going to be a French defense kind of structure. And in a French defense structure, it's characterized by having this bad bishop over here on c8. You're staring at this really bad pawn. If you've ever been in this kind of position and you're not someone that plays the French often, like, it could be something that really kind of is hard to deal with. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad bishop. So as we continue on, we're in an advanced French variation where you're kind of fighting over these two pawns right here. The bishop comes out, the castle, you know, everything's going in the middle, and we're kind of in our typical advanced structure here. Queen comes out to b6, targeting this pawn so you can't move this bishop. b3 is played so that you can move the bishop now. Knight to b4, attacking this knight. And then white pushes its knight back. And this is where it starts getting to where we want to be for this lesson. So in this position here, black says, I want to trade off this really bad bishop. It's terrible and be behind this pawn here, so let's just trade it off, and it will help me loosen up my piece structure and I'll be better off for it. And like, while that makes sense on a plan level kind of situation, you'll see here in this game that it can become actually a weakness now at first glance. The problem now with this position is black is still lacking space in this situation. You're like, yeah, you own the file, but this knight's not going anywhere. This queen doesn't have a lot of prospects to go as well. This pawn can't push forward, and like, where's this bishop gonna go? This bishop is also a bad bishop as well in this current state of mind. So white goes g4, black goes knight to e7, knight to h4, knight to g6, and then knight h to g2, rerouting this knight. So now that white has more space, we can avoid further exchanges, and he doesn't have to open up the position, which would help black in the long run. Another thing to point out in this position is black is now wanting to get into this e7 square for both this knight and this bishop. Only one can occupy at that time, so the space is really lacking in this position. So he brings the bishop out, trying to, you know, complete his development. Bishop to e3 here. White trying to complete his development at the same time after the castle. h4, going to attack the knight. After f5, black pushes forward. En passant, takes it. Rook to f6, h5, knight to f8, g5, rook to f7, and then queen to g4, thrusting forward. Also, what this queen is doing now is hitting this e6 pawn, which would be really nice if that c8 bishop was here defending that pawn. After bishop to d6, white just continues pushing forward. After the take, rook comes back, doubling up on the file. And now that this piece can't be here on this king side, we're taking away another piece here. So the things that we have to look for is, how do we dislodge this knight, right? We want to be able to attack this piece and you get the easy checkmate from here on out. So from here, white decides to go bishop to f4, trying to exchange its own bad bishop because there's really nowhere for this dark squared bishop of white's to go. The queen drops back here on queen to a6, knight to f3, knight to d3, and then white finally trades off this dark squared bishop, hitting this, getting this queen back into the game. And after the queen takes, rook a to d1 and rook to c3. And from here, what black's trying to do is really just try to get the knights off of these two squares that white's trying to get, and get the knights more active. Because right now the knights are pretty passive, and white wants to get them in the game. So having this knight here is very paramount to keeping black's position secure. However, white starts maneuvering its rooks, trying to buy some time. After e5 here, attacking this pawn, white says, okay, I don't have time to double up and take this knight now. I'm gonna have to sack the rook. And you're sacking this rook in order to get some more activity with these knights. So after the rook takes, the knight takes over here on e5 in a very strong position here. The rook comes back over here to c3. Knight f4, rook to c1, king to g2, just unpinning that king. Queen to a6, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, knight to e to d3. The knights are connected. The rook comes over to c7. Now the queen is positioning itself here for the win. And after the queen comes over here to d6, the knight comes out to e5, rook to e7, king to g3, just pushing that king up, getting in the game. Rook to c7, knight to f7, and now you're threatening mate right here. And after rook to c3 check, the f3 comes, and it's over from here. So this middle game tactic is really hard to understand because in French structures here, this bishop can, even though it's like kind of not playing an active role, it does play a pretty important part of defending pawn chain from attack on the king's side. So in these kind of positions, just make sure that you're not trying to rush and getting that bishop traded off. It might be serving a valuable purpose depending on what your opponent does. Now, if you're a King's Indian defense player, you know that this C8 bishop here for black plays a vital role in the king side attack when pushing these pawns down the pawn chain. And sometimes you even sacrifice it to get the advantage you need to win the game. So in these games, you'll see something like d4, d6, e4, e5, d5, g6, knight to c3, knight to d7, knight to f3. You know, we're going through our King's Indian defense. We're getting in a typical position here. And this whole time, this bishop here on c8 right here isn't going anywhere, right? So we go knight to d2, f4, rook to b1, h5, b4, a takes b4, you know, opening up the queen side. And in these King Indian style defenses, what's happening is black is pushing on this king side here, while white's trying to attack on the queen side. That's usually in a classic King's Indian defense style games, that's kind of how the battle plays out. And it's usually comes down to the first person to really win on either side. Knight to b3, knight to f6, c5, g5, and we're now in the typical position of the King's Indian defense late in the game, where black's looking to push these avalanche pawns down, attacking the king side. So after f3, trying to stop g4, g4 is played anyways, because at this point, you have the bishop here helping this out. And this bishop this whole time, because it's playing such a vital role here on the king side, it doesn't need to develop, and you have more time to push your pawns up the board while your opponents don't. Queen to e1, knight to g6, king to h1, rook to f7, knight to d2, bishop to f8, you know, all these kind of moves, maneuvering your pieces to the king side to create the biggest attack possible. So after taking, the queen comes over here to 8-2. This is all very familiar in the King's Indian defense. One thing to note in this position, the queen's not usually played to f2. At this point, now black starts his attack on that king side. So he goes by pushing up to g3. The pawn takes here on g3, and then you get the push back onto g3 here. Queen takes, you start to attack on h4 here. Queen has to drop back, knight to h5, you're getting the knights in. The rook is trying to, you know, maneuver itself, try to get itself in a more advantageous square. Knight g to f4, bishop takes f4, e takes f4, bishop to f1, h3, g8 takes h3, knight to g3 check, and now you're hitting there, and you're hitting the bishop. The king has to come here, else there's a discovered attack on the king here. So the king goes to h2, queen to h4, the pieces are coming, queen is hitting here, bishop to g2, and now black has to figure out how to continue this attack. You kind of want to sack here, but the bishop takes, and there's no real win here. And so all black needs to do is sidestep first. This knight is guarded. You're going to have to deal with this eventually. And after knight to e2, trying to rush to get to this knight move here, you have the bishop takes, and it's the first move of the game for this bishop. So even though it played a very passive role for 33 moves, it finally makes its way to the game on move 33, looking to sack itself. The knight takes here, bishop takes here, king takes, and then you have a nice little pawn, f takes, g3. And so from this position, if the king tries to run here, you take the queen. And if the queen takes here, you just have the nice little subtle move here, and you're looking at a easy win from here. So based on that, after f takes g3 there, white resigned, and black won the game. So those are just two of many examples of the deceptive bishop from c8. It may look like it's a bad bishop for all the game, but it might be serving a vital importance in your middle game. So if you like that video, please drop a like down below. Our next video will be the beastly bishop. That video will be here, and we'll see you next time.